Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and we're inviting Rene and I are interviewing Debbie Donovan today, and she has her own creativity, but she is also a fan of podcasts. And so we're going to learn about her story and learn about some of her activities from 10 years ago, and then learn about what her favorite podcasts are. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Hello.
So Let us know the early years of your life.
Yeah, so my dad was a convert. He converted during the Vietnam War in Germany. Came from a non-religious family, mostly Masonic family. And my mother was raised by, my grandfather was born into polygamy and then kicked out at 13. And so he wasn't Mormon until he married and then had kids. They were not really Mormon, and then he was a little too wild. My grandma kind of kicked him out. He came back as a repented man, and they got active in the church. So like my older aunts and uncles were not uber Mormon, but my mother and my uncle uber Mormon. And so I kind of had that in the, in the water, but not of the water experience. We moved to Utah when I was 5. My dad was an attorney and decided he hated courtroom law and decided he wanted to change careers and started working for Zions Bank as their vice president of public finance. So he worked for the church when it was still like the leaders were still on the board of directors as far as presidency. And so he had an interesting view on that as far as working for a church-owned entity and banking and being affluent in Utah. But I think
That's
because
like
he was
in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, I grew up in Sandy where, everyone was Mormon. And that was pretty much my upbringing. It was fun because, we knew I can still go through that neighborhood and I could tell you every family that lived in every house because everyone was a member and you just don't know different. And I think back, we kind of talked about this a little earlier, like back in those days, the church was kind of also a social connection, a neighborhood connection. The activities, there was much more activity as far as, homemaking and programs that made it enjoyable. It wasn't just about doing the religion on Sunday.
And ward
so
activities.
I think like sports, and young women's and going to camp and youth conferences. Like our youth conference, we went and floated the Moab River. I never had to do the Pioneer Trek. We kind of got lucky because they could pick and choose what they wanted to do with like their programs. There was more, I think, autonomy, whereas now the church kind of dictates like you can only do this and this is like what's recommended, or you can only, go to these things. And, they were still very much involved in Boy Scouts. So like my brother had great experiences with like Boy Scouts and going to Boy Scout camp. I think there was a lot of good things that kind of helped bring the community together. And it wasn't like as much as being like a huge scholar or this, test. At least the ward I grew up in, it was more fun and social. It wasn't like these big dogmatic families or, diehards. It was, we had a diverse group because we had people on the spectrum who had money. And then we had families that struggled and had a lot of kids. And, I think everyone kind of still took care of each other. And there wasn't so much, especially before credit cards and debt and all this stuff, people weren't keeping up with the Joneses as much as they are, I would say, now, or even in my 20s, where it was all about status and what you had. And, if you checked all the boxes, I kind of grew up without those kind of requirements. And so I enjoyed my experience in the church in Utah. And then we moved to Las Vegas when I was 15 because my dad they took over Nevada State Bank and we went there. And that was such a culture shock for me because my older siblings were married, going to college. So I became the oldest, and I'm the middle child, and I had 2 younger siblings. And I just remember high school, because I came from Alta and Sunday, and everyone was, that we were all kind of glitchy, but we all knew our place. You had the jocks and the cheerleaders and the rock stars and the cowboys. And then I went to Vegas, and it was during the busing system in the 90s. So every high school had to have equal minorities and, racial equality. So they bus people in from the inner cities just to make every high school equal as far as ethnicity. And it was really shocking because, like, I went through metal detectors. People are like, oh, metal detectors in schools. No, I went through metal detectors in my high school. And we had a private police force at my high school. And this is in the 90s. Like, I graduated in 93. So early 90s, like, that had existed prior because of gang violence. You bring in all these kids from all these different territories, especially inner city Vegas, because my school was right off Sahara and Valley View, so in the heart of Las Vegas. And we
Did
had
you
the
join
kids
the
coming in from
Bloods or the
projects.
Crips?
Oh my gosh, I could have joined any of them. I think I was too white or just too naive, because I think I just went in there like not knowing anything. And I'm an observer, so like I just was constantly just fascinated by what I was seeing, because I was used to just do everyone playing their part, so to speak.
Right. And so the
But
difference is that there's still a lot of Mormons in Vegas compared to other parts of the United States, but way less, where you had like maybe 70% of your high school might have been Mormon, where now was it 10% of your high school? Was it still like 3 wards worth of Mormons went there? Teens?
I would say so. Because even then, like, you knew who the Mormons were, because there they only had early morning seminary. So you'd have to get up at like 5 a.m. to go to seminary, so you knew, like, and it was just like a group of, between all the classes, like probably 25 of us that were active and participating in that program. And so you got to know, like, one of my good friends was like a stake president's daughter, very cool Mormon. And then I got to have a lot of friends that were from different backgrounds, and I really enjoyed that kind of experience. And I'm glad I had it at that young age, to have diverse friends from different places, different religious backgrounds, because I think it opened my mind at an earlier age.
Did you have some young
versus like my siblings?
Did you have some young women's leadership opportunities?
Yeah, you're always thrown into like I was always kind of like the secretary or the, presidency.
Secretary of the
But I remember like my first experience going to church in Vegas, and my Sunday school teacher, we became great friends, and I've loved her to this day. But she was a convert out of New York and grew up Catholic and just kind of sassy. And she taught like the 15 to 14, like there was a bigger grouping. So it was like 14 or 15 to 17-year-olds. And it was when combined Sunday school, boys and girls. And she comes in on the chalkboard and writes masturbation, right on the chalkboard. And I was like, oh, I love her already, because, you never got those kind of deep kind of conversations. So I think that's the one thing that converts brought to the table, which I liked Mormonism when in Las Vegas. I loved it because you had converts who brought their experiences in and then put the Mormon twist on it, which where in Utah, it was very much the bread and the butter, the pioneer stock, the generational Mormons, like, don't think outside the box mentality. So I think people who experience the church outside of Utah get more of that experience and really have a harder time kind of identifying with it until they move to Utah. and that's always interesting for me, is to see someone who's thinking, oh, I'm coming to Utah where it's going to be so great and it's the land of Zion. And then they get here and they're like, what is this place? It's like the zombie apocalypse of like, you know,
what's funny, Debbie,
spiritually stagnant.
That you mentioned that, because I think the same. I mean, I grew up with a mostly Methodist members of my family. And I went to a high school where it was my girlfriend and I. We were the only Mormons in the whole high school. So now, you know, living in an area where there's a predominant amount of Mormons, and I see this new push that the Relief Society is pushing out, where they're doing these little shorts and they're showing things that, you know, what we're doing now, how we're inclusive. And they're making it out like they just invented how to be kind to people outside of the church. Look what we're doing in Relief Society now. We're going to go talk to those Methodists over there. Is that not amazing? Are we not following Jesus? Because we've decided this is such a great idea. And Camille Johnson's out there talking about this new program where we're going to recognize other people. And anybody that grew up outside of Utah is like, yeah, that's called every day outside of your little bubble, you know? So same thing. Like, yeah, we were the only people that were members. And I was going to ask you, when you went to seminary, were there friends there that went to other high schools? So the only time you saw them was at seminary? And
no,
they all went to the same school? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we went to, the church had bought a house and then converted it into like a seminary building. It was like a small house. So it was right across the street from our high school.
Okay. Yeah. That was more in the 90s. Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that when you have family members that are not members of the church, or you go to school with people, you understand that, oh, this is the real world. And it's not such a, oh, should we be nice? Should we talk? Should we talk to these people? I don't know. You know, it's like, I hope so. I don't know.
And, you know, sadly, like parts of Utah are still like that. I mean, I lived in Utah County and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's Sandy, 1982. And like, this place has not evolved. Like, as far as like the mentality of members or the way they act, you know, I was just kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So you survived high school. Then
yeah. And then I ended up, my parents divorced. Just because I think that move was really hard for them. And my mom went through a real part of depression and kind of lost her sauce, and then became extremely anti-Mormon and like left the family, didn't talk to her own children after the divorce. It was ugly, ugly stuff. Like my brother was on his mission and they didn't even tell him my parents got divorced until he got back.
Oh my. Hi, we're at the airport. Your dad's over there. We're not talking. Yeah.
And your mom's over here. And like this whole thing happened. So, you know, that kind of was really interesting because at the time, early on, I was dating the bishop's son and and they were like the affluent family in the ward. And then he went on his mission and I kind of did my own thing. I didn't say I'd wait for him or anything like that. But he came off his mission. And I was back in Vegas because my mom moved back to Utah and I decided I was better off with my dad in Vegas. And so we reconnected. And like within 3 months had this whirlwind, like, oh, I should marry you, you know, thing. And I think for me, it was because it was like checking those boxes. I wanted to feel normal and right, especially after my family's extreme blow up. I wanted to do all the right things and I didn't want to go through a divorce myself. And here's this great guy who's a return missionary. We dated in high school. We have this temple marriage. And I remember the first real interactions as being his wife, you know, his grandmother lecturing me on why I wasn't ironing his shirts. Ooh. And I was like, and at the time I was the main breadwinner. Like I had this great job on the Strip, doing some photography. So I was making most of the money and doing like most of the hours. And he was starting like a mortgage company with his mother. So I was like, I don't have time to iron his shirts. Like, what are you talking about?
That's right.
Can iron his own shirts.
Her mother-in-law complained that she wasn't ironing her husband's socks. So that's the
Yikes.
Yeah.
a little bit better.
I'm in big trouble.
Yeah. And, it was really interesting because I worked so much. He was playing ward basketball, every Wednesday and we bought a house and everything. We were very go-getters. And there was a girl who he'd served a mission with who started coming to the Wednesday night basketball games to watch him play basketball. And they kind of reconnected, and I found this out, and I called him out on it. And I was like, I'm a little more verbose. I was kind of like, what the F are you doing? Like, what's going on? Like, we have a temple marriage. Like, why are you talking to this girl? Because I knew his kind of history with her. And they had like a mission flirtation thing. And so we went to the bishop, of course, to talk about, like, what do we do? Do we need counseling? And we've only been married, 4 months or 5 months at this point. And the bishop tells me, well, maybe if you didn't swear.
Oh,
what?
wow.
And maybe if you were more spiritual, because, there was times I worked on Sunday, or because I was so busy, I didn't want to take a church calling because I couldn't devote myself to a calling, because I wasn't just a stay-at-home wife or someone working part-time at like the Gap. I actually was making a lot of money, and I just kind of remember being dumbfounded. Like, this is the advice.
Yeah. Do you know what he did for a living? This bishop?
The bishop?
Yeah.
No, we were only in that ward for 5 months because we bought our house right after we got married.
Yeah.
And then that whole time I was really pretty much working. So I didn't have a huge relationship with him.
Yeah. Because it's so fascinating, these people that are given this authority to counsel and to give advice to a young married couple. And he has,
and it wasn't even like go to therapy or anything, or, hey, stop talking to this girl. It was like,
there's a thought.
Don't swear. Don't swear, and all your marital problems will be solved. And I was like, well, the only reason why I'm swearing.
Yeah. That was your fault. You didn't wear enough lipstick.
Yeah. So he filed for divorce. And I remember my dad being absolutely disgusted because, he was a real proponent of like, wow, Debbie really did good with this one. And it checked all the boxes. And my dad I remember him looking at me saying, it's better 5 months than 5 years and 5 kids.
Yeah.
Like, you're getting out scot-free.
Yeah.
And that was kind of really eye-opening. And then after that, because I'd already been through the temple, I remember going through that whole progress of like trying to then figure out my next path, or was I spiritual enough? And so I went uber to the extreme. Like, my friend who was my Sunday school teacher then became my really good friend. And I was going to the temple like twice a month with her and another friend. Like, we were religious because I really wanted to, if I wasn't good enough for him, I wanted to be good enough for someone else.
Oh my gosh.
But, in Vegas, it was interesting because, and especially because I worked on the Strip, I wasn't interacting with a lot of Mormons. And because of my job, I wasn't getting a lot of those interactions to meet people. And I wasn't really going to singles ward, because I was living with my dad or living on my own. And I liked my family ward kind of vibe. So, I had a lot of weird blind dates. I will say that. Where you're like, oh, this is the token setup. I know one single guy in the church who will date the divorcee, because at that point too,
that's true.
I was a divorcee. That was so unheard of. Like, oh, well, especially for 20 somethings or return missionaries, no one wants to date the girl who,
even though you were married in the temple, you're still chewed gum and like licking an ashtray or whatever. You were used chattel.
Yes. And I had the stigma of, well, if she's been divorced, because everyone's still dating to marry, is it gonna last the second time? And her parents are divorced.
Oh yeah.
So double.
Oh yeah.
Double stigma. Double stigma.
DNA. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not stable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really interesting. I had a friend get me on, and this is back in the day when Mormons had that, remember mormonsingles.com, the dating site? I don't know if you guys know about that.
I
They
heard of it.
LDS singles.
They didn't have a
There was
profile.
like before like Tinder and all these things, like when the internet was still coming out, like early 2000s.
Yeah.
There
'Cause
was
there was
Mormon
like
singles.
Christian mingle was a thing, so
Yes.
they tried to do that for Mormonism, whatever.
Yeah, they have a
Yeah.
Jewish one. Mormons had theirs.
Yeah. So my girlfriend, my temple going girlfriend with 5 kids was like, you need to do this because you're just not dating anyone and you're too cute and da 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 da. And maybe you'll meet someone this way because you're not meeting anyone in Vegas. So, we created a profile. And I remember kind of scrolling through it and I'm like, oh, been there, done that, seen this. You kind of already are judging people and identifying like, and so it was interesting. I came upon this profile and it was very, very funny and witty. And I actually responded. And this is my ex-husband, my second ex-husband. And we hit it off right away. He's so funny. He's very musically talented. His family is awesome. I can't say enough about that. And I ended up moving to Arizona to pursue that relationship. Because I'd already been in Vegas 10 years. I was burnt out of the strip. I kind of already made my money. I felt like I wanted to do something else. And so I did go to Arizona. We dated 6 months and then decided to get married. But I had already been divorced and so had he. So that was nice. We both been stigmatized.
Equal ground.
Yeah.
Equal ground, yes. And he had a funny story because like his ex-wife, when he married, right off his mission, it only lasted less than a year because they were so incompatible. But he used to say she would, I hate to say this now, cry every time they would be intimate. Like she was not, and so he was traumatized by that. Like his whole experience was even more traumatic than mine. And I was like, okay, we trauma bonded over kind of our Mormon first marriages.
Not to cry.
Yes. Yeah. And so because we had both been married prior, we just had a civil marriage, because you couldn't get sealed right away. And it was cool. His dad was a bishop. I have a type. And he married us in our backyard. He had a house. And so we invited friends over and just kind of had this elopement. And, we really had a great marriage because he was really good for me in the way that he was funny and open and not judgmental to all those kind of stigmas. And we really had a lot of fun together. And the interesting thing is like, well, how did that marriage end? We ended up having a daughter who had a congenital heart defect. And we didn't know it at the time because her heart, in the ultrasound back in the day, it looked great, but she had transposition of the great vessels. So it's basically the great vessels in the heart are reversed. They call it like blue baby syndrome. And usually it has a very high success rate of that kind of surgery. So when the baby's born, the blood goes like this once it's circulating, but with the transposition, it goes like this. So it never gets oxygen.
Oh my gosh.
So our daughter ended up having open heart surgery 4 days after she was born. And then subsequently had a lot of problems because of the surgery. And she only lived 31 days. So here we are praying and just, this massive amount of faith and just, keep my daughter alive. Like I'm thinking to myself, is this the testament that's going to really solidify my testimony? Because, I was kind of always put myself first, Mormon, like my career or what I wanted. And I thought, well, this is going to be the gauntlet, and this is going to be the thing that will turn me into that Mormon I want to be, like that ideal Mormon, where I have that testimony that can't be shaken. And, so I kind of went in it and I just put everything into this girl. And then when we found out, like her organs are failing and she's not going to make it, I kind of remember just being so mad at God because she had so many blessings promising her that she would. I mean, that's the sad part, is people who think they have this authority to heal or to promise things, and then those promises didn't get delivered. I was kind of like, whoa, me and God, we gotta talk. And you know, her passing was beautiful. All of our family was there, and it was okay for everyone in that sense. And I remember they said, you can come back the next day, and you know, if you want to see her before we were going to transport her to Utah, because it was in Arizona, to be buried. And I wanted to just go in and kind of have a private moment holding my daughter, because everything up until that point had been surrounded by nursing and medical and family. So you're kind of holding it together. Thank God for that kind of support of everyone involved. But I wanted that kind of quiet moment, and also to hold her in that quiet moment without all that stuff on her. And I really had a profound experience that I remember thinking that this was going to be the thing that solidified my faith in Mormonism. And I remember holding her in that moment just by myself and feeling like something that was more than God, like it had no words. And it made me realize that there wasn't a religion or a definition or anything in this world that can say where we go or what we do or how to live. Like, no one can define that. And in that moment, I just knew that regardless of my life's journey, it wasn't Mormonism that was going to make or break me, or this religious dogma that I kind of already struggled with. And that kind of freed me in the most profound way, because subsequently, like, our marriage fell apart. Like, it was so sad, and going through that grief process without any real skills of how to grieve, and then this Mormon belief system of like, oh, families can be together forever, and coming back into that world and having people say the things they said to us, like, oh, you're so lucky your child's celestial, you know, you'll get to see her again. And I was like, no, I wanted her right now. I don't want to think about the next. Don't tell me, you know, I was kind of like, don't tell me how to think about this. Like, how dare you? Because, you know, especially because everyone in our peer group was like younger, 20s, 30s, you know, giving us this, like, these talking points. And I was like, shut up. You have no idea. And until you're in that moment, I don't want you to say one word to me about what I will or won't see, or what I will or won't experience or have, because you don't know. And we divorced because I think both of us were tired, angry, and marriage was no longer fun. And we both wanted different things. And it was liberating. I got to move to Denver. I met my late husband, who was Catholic, and I got to have another whole life. And my ex-husband, got to really pursue his music career. He got to have his own another child, and we're good friends now. I mean, and we both say, if it wasn't for the church, we probably would have never gotten married. We would have just dated and been, you know, a couple for a while. But we had that experience, and we're both thankful for it, because we both kind of left the church at the same time and then went on our own separate paths. So
it's so sad, but it's beautiful that you were able to, you know, grow from it and have that experience. And I assume that your husband's experience, your ex-husband's experience, was a little bit different than yours, but still led him out of the church. And so that's, you were free to live your own lives.
Yes. And pursue those things that we wanted to pursue, you know, because he was wanted to be a musician. when you're in the confines of doing the church thing, like that's not really like, unless you're going to be singing church music or performing at like church functions, there's really not a niche for that, especially in the early 2000s. And so he was really able to pursue those creative endeavors. He really made some, I think, great albums. A lot of them have our life story in it that I look back and I'm like so thankful for those songs because they're beautiful. Even if he didn't have this like great career, he got to enjoy that. And then, he kind of settled back down into his life, and now he has his son, and he didn't end up marrying the girl he had a child with, but they're great co-parents, and he's a great dad and living all of his dreams. And I'm so happy for him in that regards, because I feel like you can go through an experience in or out of the church and it can either make or break you. And the good thing is it didn't break either one of us, and both of us did go on. And like I said, I met my late husband, got to have a whole other life outside of Mormonism because I just left the church about 29. And then I met him and we were together 10 years, and I had 2 more sons. Like, we weren't planning on having children, but I got to have 2 sons. We had a surprise, and then we just said, well, let's keep it going. And so I had my 2 boys at 37 and 38. So I was very much older mom. And I'm super thankful for that, because I didn't think I'd ever have kids again, because I didn't really want to do the Mormon path. And I didn't want to plan my life thinking, oh, I'm going to do this and have this many kids and do, like in Mormonism, you're raised to think you're going to do all those steps. Like you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you have this many kids, or as many as you can have. And, I didn't want to create a life with expectations. I wanted to live it, so to speak.
I've known some people who maybe were having marital difficulties with, let's say, younger children, but thinking, well, we'll stay together and the church is a good support, with the primary and the youth programs, and we'll try to keep it together as long as we can. And so you didn't have primary or youth programs for your children, so you had to like invent your own stuff or explore what the world had, and the world may have had equally good things for your children.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I made the bad choice, though, of moving to Utah County after my husband died, because my dad and my mom lived in Utah County, and I thought, well, I need to be close to family, and I do love my parents. And I moved into this neighborhood in Orem that was so beautiful. I loved my house, and so quaint, and it was next to Sarah Park and had a new school. So I was checking all my like personal boxes. A lot of kids in the neighborhood, which I wanted my kids to have that kind of experience that I had growing up, playing with friends in the neighborhood and being safe to do that. But I was the only non-Mormon in that neighborhood, pretty much. And it was a generational neighborhood, which I wasn't aware of. So these people had been raised in this neighborhood. Their parents still lived in the houses they were raised in. And then when someone would die, they would buy the house next to their parents or next. And so you had a sibling here, a sibling there, a parent here, that was our neighborhood. So I was once again the outsider.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. You don't know that going in.
No.
But also, I'm the woman who has to mow her own lawn. I'm the woman who wants a garden, plant it, and build it herself. I'm the woman who also has to be the mother and father to my kids and do everything on my own. And, there was, I think, some judgment towards that, but some people were open and nice. But then I think there was also some jealousy because I had freedom that they didn't have. And I didn't have that. Some of them had been burdened by those marriages of like, well, I don't really like him, but we have all these kids. And, you know, I remember having a few people tell me, oh, you're so lucky
Oh,
that my husband died.
gosh.
Like they were just wishing their husband had died so they could have the money and have the freedom to do what they wanted without the spouse. And I was like, honey, I mean, I even tell people to this day, like, you don't want to be a single parent. It's the hardest job you can ever do. And if you can make a marriage work, find a way to make a marriage work. Like, you know, there's sometimes it's broken, but like, if you can go to therapy or rediscover interests or create new hobbies together, like do something besides just checking boxes, because it is easier to work through problems in a marriage than to be single. And I can say that because I'm still in Utah, and it's still like dating is, I still don't date. It's still weird. Because now they have more baggage, you know? Instead of being 20 and going, you're divorced, it's like they're divorced and they got, you know, 5 kids and a crazy ex-wife. I'm like, no, thank you. I'm not.
If you want confirmation, Debbie, that you're doing the right thing, watch The Golden Bachelorette. Right there. I will never date ever, ever again. It is the scariest show. It is just eye-opening. After a certain age, it's like, I think we just need to maybe go out for dinner and we're good.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for a long relationship. I know you have diabetes. You're 68 years old. I don't want to do this. It's like, oh Lord, that'll confirm that you're making the right choice right there.
Yes. I just want friends who like to go out to dinner, maybe like to go hiking, own their own stuff, and don't want me to take care of them. I'm okay with that. Like, yes.
Yeah.
Chat a bit, commiserate a bit, but not too much.
You don't want a nurse.
Yeah.
You don't need a purse. Those are the 2 things you get the older you get. So yeah.
Right. Unless he's got so much shit money, you know, I will sell out. I've even said I'll be a polygamous wife if it means I get the travel perks, the prime real estate, and no one wants to actually have sex with me. Okay.
Well,
you just want me to spoon feed you once a week? Okay, I'll come over.
I was going to say we need a sugar daddy, but then that's a sex thing. So I don't know if that's going to work.
That's right.
Yeah.
So moving to Utah, you got to have some other experiences. You were able to join the political fray a little bit. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, you know, because I'd already been out of the church for, 10 years. I didn't leave for, I don't like the dogma or I don't like the people. Well, kind of that, but I was just like, I don't like it anymore.
Or history.
I'm not going to live my life being told what to do. Like, I want to choose what I want to do. And if I make the wrong choice, okay, I'm going to work through that. Or if I make the right choice, hey, I've seen miracles too. I'd already had that autonomy to live in that paradigm of being an adult, I guess, who has free agency. And I met a really good friend, and she was a beautiful neighbor, and she's like this super mom who was a super Mormon. And at the time, she's left the church, which is kind of funny, but just a powerhouse and just an example of great human. And she wasn't raised in Utah. In fact, she was a military brat and was raised all over. So I think that's why we bonded, is because she just liked interesting people and liked me because I was probably not her typical neighbor or Mormon friend or ex-Mormon friend. And so we talked a lot about things that just had nothing to do with, Mormon religion. We could just be moms or good friends. And at the time, it's interesting, she was involved with OUR. And this is when OUR was first getting started. So because she was really passionate about child trafficking and wanted to make a difference because she had heard these stories, and started fundraising for Tim Ballard, and was really great at it, because when she does something, she's going to do it skin in, skin out. So I think at the time she was able to raise a lot of money for Tim. And this is right before he did Sound of Freedom. He did his own version of a movie with himself starring in it. Yeah. But it's the same story of Sound of Freedom, but it's Tim. And so she invited me to the premiere of this when they had it at, in South Jordan. And so I was like, okay. You know, I care about people and things happening. I've seen bad things happen all over. You know, in Vegas, you see bad things.
Yeah.
And so I went to this movie premiere, not really knowing about the issue as far as a broad scale, and got to meet Tim and these people. And I had been at Vegas and worked in some really nice restaurants and waited on a lot of celebrities and had a lot of experience with big money or big celebrity or affluence. And I kind of remember meeting him and thinking, you're kind of schmarmy. Like, you think you're a celebrity. And I'd already met some of the best. So it's kind of like, not impressed, you know? Like, I'm like the one girl who's not impressed by this guy at this place. And I, you know, I think she was like, oh, what did you think? And I was like, the movie was okay. It's okay. But I kind of remember telling her, like, you know, why are you spending so much time involved in this when, like, there's human trafficking going on right here in Utah? Like, because I knew about polygamy.
Yeah.
And the polygamous story, because in Sandy, I grew up right below Warren Jeff's Alta School. I saw the polygamists going to school every day. And I was like, you can make a difference right here at home. And I was kind of surprised because I'm like, why isn't Tim doing anything for this group? If you want to say we could start at home.
Yes.
Make
Debbie,
a difference here.
I can't believe how excited I am, because I feel as though I had the same BS meter. It's like the first time I saw him, I was like, what do you mean you're in Haiti? You're helicoptering in Haiti? It's like, why? Because it's not illegal to do that. If you want to stop, go to Portland. You want to stop human trafficking, go to Portland, go to Vegas, you know, go. That was my first thought, was something's off here. That you don't have to go to Haiti to work in to stop sex trafficking. But yet I can't believe all the people, even when we were living in Oregon, the people are like, oh, Tim Ballard is doing these amazing things. I'm like, is it legal to fly a helicopter and drop into a place, a bar? Does that make sense to you? I love that you also had a high BS meter. You're like, I'm not impressed with you, doTERRA people. What's going on here? You know?
Well, and the way he was, like his baby blue eyes and his ability to cry, I'm like,
Yeah.
I really don't like men who can cry on cue. It creeps me out. And also, I kind of like the manly man, and I had always been attracted to like men of like a certain type. And I have friends and cousins who are military, and I'm like, don't we have guys that actually do that for the government? Like, why do we need a group of rogue wannabes?
SEAL,
Like
CrossFit, Navy SEAL, CrossFit. I'm not sure. Yeah.
yeah, total LARPing. And so I kind of convinced her, like, you know, like, look at this. And so she did. She, like I said, she's the go-getter, and she started interviewing everyone who had fled polygamy, everyone wanting to know, or anyone who had been actually sex trafficked in this state. So not even Mormon, but had been in a sex trafficking ring. I mean, we interviewed, and I got to interview as a co-person with her, a few of these people. And I was so glad, because I was like, oh, this is bigger than I thought. This is mind blowing. Like, this is a landmine. And why is Utah allowing this? And that was kind of our shock and awe after going through this. It's like, if this is everywhere in every group, not just the fundamentalists, but in some of these weird Mormon groups, and some here and some there, and some with the energy healers and the woo-woo. I'm like,
Yeah.
I think Utah should know about this, or they do know about this. And it was kind of like, and we were like, how do we convince people that this is wrong? Because we already have a victims fund for anyone coming out of sex trafficking. It was like, well, victims of polygamy are basically coming out of that same kind of been trafficked mentality, like no voice, no choice, no ability to even earn money, or, you know, they're basically being used as a product by this group. But you can't say that in Utah because it's the sister to Mormonism without them saying, well, it's freedom of religion and we don't get on people who are polyamorous. So why are we going to judge a polygamist? So we had to really think of how to make this palatable to pass as a bill.
Pitch.
Yeah. And it was really going back through Utah history and the history of polygamy as a whole. Like we read the Canada study, we read all the congressional records of Utah becoming a state. And the one thing Utah always likes to say is, well, they've always been so hard on us and we're such victims. And, you know, we were just doing what the Lord told us and we don't do it anymore.
The principle.
Yeah, it was not like that. And you know what? I will say this, the federal government was so sympathetic to what polygamy was doing to the Utah territory and the women and children, because they could see it even back then, that this was harmful to the community. It's not good for society and it shouldn't be allowed. And they had no business ever joining the state until they stopped that practice. And to then tell
it wasn't persecution, it was empathy that the outside world had for Utah.
Massive. So, I mean, and also it wasn't like bigotry, like, oh, they're so weird and backwards. It was like, these people are like they're thriving, they're smart, they have talents and skills, but they're stuck in this thing, this like machine. So it wasn't even like these are backwards, like, oh, we got to help these poor people out. It was like, these people, if they just crossed over here, like if you just come this way, you could have a better life. You could have the end all be all of what life should be or how things should be. And I loved that. And so we really approached it from that. This isn't about religion. This isn't about persecuting anyone who chooses that. It's about giving people who have been born into that, who don't know a different way, a way out, and put them on the victims fund like you would anyone coming out of human trafficking or sex trafficking or domestic abuse, because there is a lot of that in these groups. Statistically, it's been proven by those people coming out of the groups. So we were able to prove it with statistics and with also making it about the human experience. And so she did a beautiful job. The bill passed like bam, hands down, flying colors. And then it was kind of like this waiting game of like, what's this going to do? Like, because most of these people leaving don't have any resources. Like, we've opened resources. And a year later, Deidre Henderson out of Utah County, our now Lieutenant Governor, and I'm going to tell you, Utah County, her district has a lot of FLDS polygamous groups in it, passed the bill to make it a misdemeanor where it was like a traffic violation. So they're no longer a victim of a crime. It's like they ran a stop sign. And it was so heartbreaking. It was so heartbreaking. And I'm curious how that bill got passed, because, you know, they said, well, there's such a stigma and maybe people will be free to leave now. And it was like, no, you buried it and you want to bury it. And you were never prosecuting it to begin with, ever. Because if Warren Jeffs was on the FBI wanted list, and when they busted him, they could have hands down busted him for polygamy alone, because he had over 80 wives. Right there, 80 felonies.
A lot of laws broken.
On top of everything else he was doing. But they tried to make it about, oh, well, he married this girl to her cousin. And what's her name? Alyssa Wall?
Alyssa Wall.
They putting her through that process to prosecute Warren Jeffs, I felt was so unnecessary and probably traumatized her so much, reliving that experience, when they could have thrown the book at Warren. And then when they almost let Warren out because of a bad jury instructions, it was just like, what? And thank God Texas raided that compound and did the job that Utah couldn't, because that guy is now in jail for life. And they exposed everything that he was doing, not just taking brides, but doing awful, awful stuff. And I just wish Utah had more cojones to stop the corruption, because I look at Utah and I love it so much, but I see how bad politics and corruption can really hurt women, children, men. And until Utah starts putting the hammer down on what happens, it's and I blame the church mostly, because they have such free dichotomy to push legislation through or say who should get voted in, or they have so much affluence in Utah's political world and in our social world, when Utah's not predominantly Mormon, but most of our legislation or legislatures and Congress and Senate are Mormon. And so
And
they are going to follow the prophet first before they follow.
What the church wants happens, right? And so the church could do the right thing.
They could.
And so
they could also pass mandatory reporting. But the church says, no, no, no. That's why they ruined the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts was a great organization until the church hightailed onto it and then allowed all that abuse to happen that then damaged the Boy Scouts, because it wasn't a place to go get, diddled by a scout leader, until Utah or until Mormonism and their diddlers apparently not reporting took it and turned it into something grotesque. And I feel like until Utah cleans up its act and makes things, separates church and state, there's always going to be these victims. And it's heartbreaking, because in a country that says we're free, we're diverse, we matter on every level, everyone matters, everyone has a voice, everyone has a choice, that doesn't exist in Utah. That's right. And especially with the church coming out with the new anti-LGBTQ stuff, I'm like, how harmful is that? Because I know even active members who have kids who identify as something else. They still love their parents. They still love their friends. They still want to be accepted in their community.
And to the church, and they're not worthy of the highest part of heaven just because of.
They're not even worthy to going to the bathroom at this point. Right. And I hope that comes back and bites the church in the butt, because they've had a playbook that I think has been able to work really well for them for a long time, because a society has been very much culturally conservative, whereas now I think we're a little more, even if we're conservative, like I'm conservative, but I'm not, you're
not blind to problems that exist.
Yes, I'm not burning the cross out in front of my yard, we're not that far on that side. So I feel like there's people who are very moderate, and I feel like society has become more accepting and diverse in general. And so any group that's going to cause another group to hate on someone, I think people are just like, ugh.
And there is a pattern in it, right? Like the church didn't like American citizens because America was against their polygamy. And then the church didn't like Black people because why not, right? And then once Blacks had the priesthood, they had to look for some other group to hate on in order to rally the troops or something. Yeah. So did some of this political activism get you started into consuming podcasting and other things like that?
Well, yeah, because I think I was so happy that finally there were people that thought like me, talked like me, believed like me. And that's kind of just been the trend of podcasting becoming this new thing in the last real 5 years, a medium for media consumption. And it's changed things in a way that I think even the church can't even keep up with. they used to be able to control the narrative and
Right.
keep it at least in a box or tighten it down. They can't. And I love that. And I love that on any political spectrum or story. So I'm a big fan. And that's why I said, like, Mormons have come out swinging, like Rebecca Biblioteca. Her and Bill Reel did this really great podcast last night talking about women in the church. And, the role as women, as far as what we were taught to believe, to stay home. And Rebecca's joke is like, where's my 401k? And just, working for the church library at BYU and being pregnant and then not getting maternity leave. And I'm like, where else would you see a major corporation that has a huge stock portfolio be allowed to get away with absolute sexism, absolute biased against anyone who's gay or still a woman or still a minority or still?
So you think
it's
patriarchy?
astounding.
You think patriarchy has a blind spot then? And it's half the world,
because
right? It's women.
Jean, I'm going to have to interrupt here. Debbie, this has been such a thrill for me, but I've got a buzz. I would love to continue talking with you.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that Jean introduced you to me. It's been an absolute thrill. And I could see where you and I could have a 4.5 day, no sleep conversation. We have so many things in common. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I forgot to mention that Rene has a show called She Became
Visible.
Visible.
Yes, I've seen it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure Debbie has an open invitation to come on Rene's show.
Yeah.
And thanks, Rene, for joining us this far. And we're going to wrap it up soon anyway. And thanks a lot.
I haven't met a lot of people that I could sit with and just go, yeah, with. So wonderful. I'm so thrilled that I've had this opportunity. Thank you to Jean.
Thank you, Jean.
Way I'm pointing. So you guys have a great day. And Debbie, you're going to hear from me.
That's right.
Sounds good.
See you later, Rene.
Right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Yeah. So I mean, that's my Mormon background, my political background, my current belief in political background, and also why I love podcasts. Why I love
you talked about
anyone.
A show last night. What were some of your first Mormony podcasts you listened to?
I think really Mormon Stories, because they've been doing it the longest.
Biggest.
And also because the biggest. And also because my friend Angela went on Mormon Stories. So I wasn't exposed to it until she went on and was interviewed. And then she did also Sean McCready, who is an ex-Mormon, but McCraney. She did his. And so I was like, oh, those were two like the old school niche makers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I listened to a few of those. But I still liked I had a few political ones I followed, and just some gardening special interest groups that I followed. But it really hasn't become until lately that this platform is blown up, and you're seeing people just come out of the woodworks swinging with great stories, like the Nuance Ho. I love her. And even Cults to Consciousness with Shalise
and Sola. So I have something to say about that. So after, podcasting on and off for 15 years, John had built up 27,000 YouTube subscribers as of January 1st, 2021. And he is now up to 262,000 subscribers. Shalise Ansola started a little over a year ago, I believe. And she is knocking on the door with 240,000 subscribers. And Alyssa Grenfell started her channel in December, and she has 250,000 subscribers. And they're both going to pass John probably in October in their subscriber base. And that's totally amazing. It's great for women to do it too. There's been so many men that have been involved in the podcast world. John Larson, you mentioned McCraney, and and John Dehlin, and even me. That's why I try to get women co-hosts on, to try to get more women's voices out there. And speaking of co-hosting, the first time actually I probably ever noticed you in the chat of a show was during a Backyard Professor episode, maybe a year ago. And I was like, who is this Debbie Donovan? And then pretty soon Debbie was doing some super chats for Carrie shirts. And so I was just like amazed, and it's like, that's pretty cool that you were doing that. You're supporting him. Then we find out that we'll say Carrie didn't get that money, and he sort of branched off on his own, and Carrie on his own now needs more support. And so we're going to feature Carrie again, and we're going to have Debbie help me interview the Backyard Professor again. And we're going to have a sort of like a Ask Me Anything episode where Debbie and I will pretty much think about what questions fans of his might have. And if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask the Backyard Professor, either send me or Debbie, or mention in the comments below questions you'd like to have answered by Carrie Shirts. And so tell me just a little bit, give us a teaser of when you first heard Carrie do a podcast, and what were your thoughts, and what would you feel about how he was doing his show?
Well, the one thing I do like is I think Carrie was still with like doing some stuff with Bill Reel and RFM. And I think those guys are really interesting too, because I do love smart men, and especially like smart men who have like been huge apologists for the church, who then left and then argue the other side now that they're out. Truly fascinating, because I think in the doctrinal sphere, it has more weight, because I'm not a huge doctrine scholar, so I do love when someone can make it smart, because my father is a smart man and I love having smart conversations. That's always fascinating. But I think the reason why also women are so successful is because they bring in that human side of it that makes it relatable to both sides of the audience, because I think that's why podcasting has gotten so successful, is because it can attract two sides of an audience that are very different, and bring out points that normally you wouldn't think about or hear about. And that's why I love Carrie. Carrie is like so down to earth, and like so he is a bookworm, and I am a massive bookworm. Like I can read a book a day when I get on a binge. I'll just go for it. So I love
buy a book
anyone.
a day, but I can only read a book a year.
So I love anyone who loves to read and
I remember,
talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember Radio Free Mormon doing an episode and inviting Carrie on his show and talking to him as someone who had been, they each had been church apologists, and they each had maybe interacted with each other back in the day. And Carrie had like dropped off, his we'll say either apologetics or even talking about the other side, right? And he was maybe just busy doing his chess channel, and he was just living a life as an ex-Mormon in a way, we'll say. And then Radio Free Mormon brought him back to talk about things, and that got the interest, I think, of Bill, and Bill was able to secure Carrie a spot in his Mormon discussion. And then Carrie is now. Did you hear the Radio Free Mormon introduction to the Backyard Professor, or did you just catch the Backyard Professor doing his thing?
No, I saw him when they were together, and then when Backyard Professor announced he was going on his own, I was like, oh, cool, because I'll follow anyone who's interesting, regardless if they want to follow, do their own thing. Because like Nuance Hosh, Cara Burrell, she was with John, and now she's doing her own thing, and I find that equally as fascinating. So,
And one thing I like about Carey too is he is still has like a spiritual side to him, and he's fascinated by the history of religions, right? And we did an episode a couple weeks back called "For the Love of Mother God," and he was reading a book where the author Barker, I think, I can't remember her first name, has been writing books. She's a well-known scholar. She's been to even BYU sponsored activities to talk about her scholarship, and she believes that the early Jewish traditions were all about Mother God, and that the Mother God
loved that one.
was where the instruction came from. Like the Holy of Holies was to meet and to learn from God, and it was the Mother God that was giving the wisdom to people. And so it's a fascinating look, and it's pretty much targets about how long ago, we'll say 2,700 years ago, that patriarchy sort of took over from cooperatively working with the female species. And while there have been some advances, I think to myself, just think if they had been cooperatively working together for 2,700 years, what a dynamic and
so much more advanced
this would be. Yeah. So anyhow,
I loved that episode he did. That was one of my absolute favorites. Like, Carey still has the ability to blow my mind. Like, a lot of times when I watch some of these other podcasters, I can relate to them, and I like to put my 2 cents in the chat just to keep conversation going as well. But Carey, that one was so beautiful because I love symbolism. I love history. I like my friend Angela, who I've mentioned, is one of those biblical scholars who has read almost every version of the Bible in Hebrew and Greek and every freaking language. So I love having those deep conversations, and he makes it so relatable. Like, it's not like going to a lecture essay series where you're like Sunday school, barely keeping awake. He's so engaging, and he keeps it interesting and lively, and he is self-deprecating and like so funny on top of it, that I think he has a great forum as far as if you want to understand the religion. And you're right, like, he has that still very much a spiritual sense about him, which is I think beautiful.
And I like as part of the episode, I think, well, when we interviewed him, when Maven Brodie and I interviewed him, he talked about how he would read the scriptures, and whenever certain words that had been translated into the spirit as being like mother, he would switch the words, because the spirit talking to men was actually the spirit of the Mother God. And so he would switch the word to mother, and he said, when I read the scriptures that way, it was mind blowing. It was fantastic. And I recommend it to everybody. And so he has such energy. And Maven also appreciated how much Carey's getting out there to support, basically women's issues from the scriptural history standpoint. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
absolutely, because it is there. It is there. I'm sorry. It does exist. Women do also carry as many gifts and spiritual talents and gifts from God as men. I mean, there are women in the Bible. Hello.
That's right.
So
and even
I love that they're bringing that forward.
Like the oracles in Greece were women, right? And and then lots of the early figurines are the female goddesses, right? And so definitely the patriarchy has done a disservice, and we're all working together to try to end patriarchy, right? And
that's right. Well, I used to tell this great joke, and I'll end with this. It's because I think it's appropriate. Like I always used to say, well, I'm the closest thing to God you'll ever meet because, and I used to say this to my boys, it's because I gave you life. I created life. Like
That's right.
I'm the one that made you and grew you. Like, yes, your father was there, but I'm the one. Like, and God gave women that power. Like, it is, as a woman, I feel like so incredible. Like to be a mom and to have children and to have that experience, the whole process of it, of everything, it definitely makes me believe that there is something as far as a higher power, because that gift to create life and then feel that life grow and have this little human is amazing. You know, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is
So,
amazing. And so thank you, Debbie. Thank you for coming on. And thank you
of
for
course.
accepting my challenge to be my co-host in future episodes here and there for special things. Just even talking with you, I was thinking of a few different shows we might be able to do. And so I'm so honored to know you. And thanks for coming on our show. And everyone watching, like and subscribe and do all the things. And have a great rest of the year. And let's see, there's one other thing I wanted to say.
Enjoy conference.
That's right. Enjoy conference. Yeah, this might come on conference weekend. So we'll see. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.